Hi, we're just starting.
Hello.
Say hello, everybody.
We just saw James in the Giant Peach, which is just fantastic film. Really, really fantastic. Okay, Henry, I have a very silly question for you to start this conversation, and it's why do you make films?
Yeah, I have some answers. I didn't dream of being a filmmaker. You know, you read stories where the movie about Steven Spielberg. He's making films as a kid and all that. No, I wasn't one of those kids. In fact, my father would make little sort of gag films, live action, 16 millimeter, home movies, but pretty good quality. And he'd have me dress up in a costume or my siblings and do these silly little things. And I kind of, well, that's his thing. I was always, though, an artist as a kid. I was drawing. I was one of those kids always drawing. People were worried about me. He doesn't do anything else. And the thing is, over the years, I developed other interests, but the artwork was always important to me. And so while I studied, some science, I was really into physics, and I did a lot of music. That's still my main hobby.
You make
It wasn't
music?
until I was already going to college that the whole filmmaking thing happened, because I was doing sculpting and photography, drawing and painting. I had studied some science as well, but it was all artwork, and I couldn't decide what path to take, what direction. Like, well, I have to pick something to specialize in. And then I saw this animated short film on a kind of an educational TV station. It was experimental, and it wasn't even that good. It was a mixed media animation short, and the light bulb went off. I realized everything that I loved doing could come together in animation. And in a coincidence, I had found that in a couple of my subjects, in photography, I was no longer happy with like a single frame. I started telling little visual stories in a sequence of images. And then in sculpting, one of my sculptures was a life-size figure, and I didn't like the idea that it had to be stuck in one pose. So I gave it joints, and I could change the pose. So it was like I was heading towards this animation without knowing it, and then I saw that short film. And so in the end, it was all these different things I loved very much I could combine in animation. I did face, in making my first short films in college, sort of that big question of the price you have to pay. Was a huge amount of time, hours to make seconds, years to make a short film. And it was a real, I just had to make that bargain. Okay, it's worth it. And from this idea of doing just short experimental films, sort of more art films, learning to tell stories, it became my passion and became my life. It was never foreseen, but one thing led to another. And I continue, even if, even to this day, I'm always looking for new experiments, new technique to combine. I love the challenge of reinvention. So I love to bring fantasies to life, and my favorite way to do it is through animation.
That's amazing. It sounds like you kind of invented stop motion reinvented it for yourself without even knowing it. What? So, and it sounds like you were always a director. Like you were always a visionary with an idea, and so but how did you really end up directing big budget films? Because there's a lot of things if you go into animation, there's a lot of jobs you can do, but you ended up in the director's chair.
Pretty early, because I was making short films, I ended up getting a job at Disney. It wasn't my dream to work there, but it was a good place to keep learning. It's also where I made important connections with friendships with people that had a lot of impact on my life. But even there, people, because of my shorts, they saw me as a director, and they said, "Oh, do you see yourself directing the feature films?" And I said, "I don't know. I wasn't prepared." But kind of two different things happened. As I continued to learn about animation, I was sort of specializing at that point in being an animator, hand-drawn back then. They had painted cell animation before all the computers came along. But I was always working on the side on my own project. Something I had started at college, a film called Seepage. I got a grant from an arts program to finish that.
Which is fantastic, by the way. I just watched Seepage preparing for this interview. Everybody here should go to YouTube and look for it, because it's one of the most experimental things I've seen in a while. And
yeah, it's experimental. When I showed it at Disney after I finished, I had a lot of like, "Oh, what is this?" kind of reactions. But from doing the short films and experimenting, and then I ended up, I left Disney after a few years. It just wasn't where I was meant to be. And I did various things. I did little short animated films for MTV. In the early days, they did a lot of animation. But I worked for 2 live action directors. I did storyboards. And storyboarding on these live action films, very, very talented people, where they wanted to see lots of options. The budgets were low, so they wanted to storyboard and plan all the shots. And that taught me more about directing a full-length feature than anything else I did. Was working under those directors, doing the storyboards. The storyboards are like a cheap way to make your film before you make the film, before you spend the real money. And then after I'd done through that, my old friend, Tim Burton, reached out, and what was originally a television special idea, The Nightmare Before Christmas, after leaving Disney and becoming a very successful live action director, he'd been offered the chance to make that film as a feature. And he was too busy directing other live action films, so he asked me to direct it. So it was a combination, basically, of my friendship with Tim Burton and my what I'd undertaken in storyboarding in those live action films that kind of prepared me to do the job when I was asked to do the job.
Did you feel ready?
I had no fears.
You had no fears.
No, I didn't have any fears. I just I built a small team to do these little short pieces for MTV, which are very experimental. I had a lot of fun, and Tim loved those pieces I did. But I started out doing all the jobs myself, and then I started finding really good people, and then I built this small team of animators and set builders and puppet makers. I started doing television commercials with better budgets. And so it was like I was just ready to go. And then everyone on my team became like a supervisor on the feature. I mean, maybe I'm an idiot, but at the time it's like it was going to be the first stop motion feature with a decent budget from a real studio ever done in the United States. None of us were afraid. We ultimately, we worked our asses off, of course, but it was the most fun any of us ever had on a project.
But that's amazing that you just went in without fear. And you stopped. You were working on a short original TV series, if I'm correct, right? The Slow Bob in the Lower Dimension, which
Yes.
which you did one episode, which is crazy. It's just one of the. It's insane. It's just one of the most unhinged things I've seen. And you felt okay with leaving your own original idea to do this feature film, which is basically an adaptation of Tim Burton's idea.
Yeah. I had known about the idea for several years. I mean, when he first proposed it at Disney, it was a television special, and there were fewer characters. But Tim Burton in those days was a total genius, and that particular idea and the artwork that had been done was very, very impressive. I mean, it was very strong. So the choice was I was going to do a limited series of Slow Bob in the Lower Dimensions. And I'd written the scripts, and you would see that this one episode, it would all kind of make sense as the other episodes would have been made. And there was funding from a French company, Canal Plus, with MTV. And so that was going to go. And then Tim gave me the call, and I met the people involved. It really wasn't a difficult decision. I mean, I do think what would have happened if I'd made that series, and I bet it would have turned out well, but it would be a very small thing compared to what The Nightmare Before Christmas became. So it wasn't a very difficult decision. I thought about it maybe 2 days, and I felt, doing Tim's idea was the better thing to do. A whole feature film, decent budget. I could use all the people that I'd put together in my team and then grow from there.
Did you ever think of going back and creating Slow Bob?
It's I have at times, but it would be, over the years I thought of going back and trying to approach the MTV people, but all the executives had changed, and it was always going to be a challenge because it was always going to be very strange and not maybe very commercial. So I felt like, well, it would be a lot of work to convince people again after I already convinced them once to come back. But yeah, I thought about it, but I haven't seriously pursued it really in a very long time.
All right, so you dove headfirst without fear into big budget production, which is a great segue to my next question, which is about fear. Because one of your, maybe your most famous quote is, "I do scary movies for brave children." And I wanted to ask why.
I think it's what I'm drawn to naturally. I don't like really extreme horror films. I don't like a lot of blood and the gore and torture, things like that. But I think that there's a long, long tradition of scaring children with stories, movies, artwork, even puppets. It's kind of cautionary tales. When people lived in caves, say, and there's everything outside that cave could eat you, somebody's got to teach these kids. And so they would, rather than just say, "Don't go out the cave, you'll get eaten," they'd invent stories and embellish the stories about what might happen, which it's sort of like the basis, I would say, of the Grimm's fairy tales, which were stories that were collected by those brothers. Warning, they have to be entertaining. You have to keep the kids' attentions. so they have to be have a lot of imagination, but it's kind of like warning that terrible things can happen to good people for no reason. And it's in a way, it's sort of preparing kids for real life. And it is very important in my work is that the kids always survive, that it's, yes, you'll face horrible things, but be brave, be smart. You don't need superpowers, and you can survive, and you can find a new family. You can beat the villains, the horrible other mother that lives on the side of the wall. So for me, I think it's there's a line from a song Danny Elfman did for Nightmare Before Christmas: life's no fun without a good scare. And I it's just sort of where I'm always drawn to that sort of place, you know, scary. And sometimes I've gone a little far, you know. I know Coraline in particular is really extremely scary towards the end. But, you know, I base things on audience reaction and we have a film ratings board, and you know, they said okay. But in a way, that motto of mine of you know, I make, you know, scary films for brave children. I want the kids to know you have to be brave to watch my movies. And, you know, brave children of all ages. It's also meant for older people who still have a child of themselves in their heart, that they're willing to put themselves back to when they were maybe more innocent and more like children, because that's sometimes fun to do when you watch a film.
What scared you as a child?
There were a couple of recurring things. One was when I was maybe 5 years old. My mother liked sort of scary stuff, and so she took me to see this famous old film. It was new when I was 5 years old, with monsters by Ray Harryhausen. You know, you've heard of Ray Harryhausen, right?
Of course.
It was called The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's live action mixed with stop motion animation creatures. And there's this one, you know, I'm watching that film, and you, in your heart, in your soul, you know, that's real. You know, years later, you know, you understand how it's made and everything else. But there is a truth to it, that it was a real puppet, manipulated and shot. But, you know, when you're a little kid, you know that's real. I had recurring nightmares about that Cyclops. We had a very large aquarium, a fish tank in my house. My father loved have the tropical fish, and the recurring dream was that the Cyclops was this small, like a puppet-sized thing, but it was growing ever bigger in the fish tank. It was, you know, going to come and get me one day. But the thing that scared me the most, I ultimately, I love that. I love that character. I love what Ray Harryhausen gave. He gave a soul to this. You know, the animation's kind of crude, but the design and the acting are so good. I also, the other recurring thing is, you know, for a lot of the kids in the U.S. that celebrate Christmas, there's this Santa Claus idea. But I had this fear that there was a witch that lived in my chimney, and this witch, you know, was going to come down and take me away through that chimney. So that was another recurring fear of mine, you know, dream I would have again and again for a few years. And finally, I would say my my father was from the state of New Jersey, right near New York, and I grew up there. But my mother was from the deep South of the United States. Her family was very poor. We would go down every summer until I was 16 years old. And one of the best things, though, was their imaginations. And we had this relative, Aunt Lib. I don't know if she was my real aunt or everyone just called her Aunt Lib. She was very beautiful. She wore bright red lipstick. But the thing she did was she'd gather all the cousins, the kids, and tell ghost stories once a week at night. And they were bone-chilling and wonderful ghost stories. One was about a witch who'd captured some children, and at night she would take her skin off like a costume, like her clothing, and hang it up and sleep without her skin. And then the kids managed to put hot pepper inside her skin. And when she woke up to catch them when they were trying to escape, she put it on, but the hot pepper got her. But then at the end, Aunt Lib would always give us something magical. One of the gifts I remember, after she'd scare the hell out of us, she gave us all a Mexican jumping bean. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but what it is, it's a small nut that has a worm inside it that is moving. So you put them out, and these little nuts are kind of rocking. Anyway, those are some of the foundational things I was scared of.
Wow, that's amazing. I feel like you gave me the Harryhausen experience with the Nightmare Before Christmas, because I remember when I first saw it as a child. I think I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. It was maybe the most terrifying thing I've seen, but I also couldn't keep my eyes off of it. And And I think also, like, subconsciously knowing that this is an actual physical thing, which is something that is very unique to stop motion, also just added to that experience. And I would love to hear if you think, like, were you drawn to stop motion in particular because of that attribute that it has, that there's something weird about it. It's real, but it's moving in a way that it's not supposed to. And
I tried different types of animation. I was that kid who was drawing all the time, so I worked at Disney and did traditional. I trained with really good people, much better animators than myself. But I did that. I did a lot of cutout animation. But it was when I did that film Seepage, and I got the government grant to finish this film I'd started as a student. That's when I really kind of went from 2D to 3D. I had these large figures that they're mainly cutouts, but they're in a dimensional world. And I just got very excited about stop motion. And that sort of grabbed hold of me and became my specialty. It was just, I even ended up, I did a CG short film at a company years later called Moon Girl. And it's okay. It's, but the stop motion is what I'm most drawn to. I think part of it is, I've said this in another interview, so if you've heard it, I'm sorry, but I think that when you're a kid, when you're very small, everyone has a favorite toy, a doll, a stuffed animal, not a real animal, but everyone has a that they believe is alive and that they talk to it, they share their thoughts, and in your mind, you make it come to life. You can almost see it moving. I think that that's maybe a primal thing about stop motion. It connects back to that time when you're like very, very young and toys came to life. And I think that's one thing that attracted me to it. The other side of that, of stop motion, is it feels like ancient magic, old magic. It'll never be new. It's already, it can't get old because it's already ancient. You know, it's like probably the first type of animation that was done 125 years ago. And I just have this feeling that it's ancient, old, and it's like alchemy. So it connects to for me, it's like being a very young kid, imagining your toys come to life. And this other idea is that it's really old magic, that you're just the latest magician working this very old trick to try to tell an interesting story with interesting characters.
I completely connect with that. I think that's also what draws me to it. Let's talk about Seepage a little bit, even though I don't think anybody here except for me saw it. But you should, all of you. What I really liked about it was what was so interesting to me is that it really showed me how connected you are to art history and to like modernistic movements, to Cubism and Italian futurism and all kind of shapes and colors, and you can see it also in your later film, in your designs and stuff. And I would love to hear you talk about this for a little bit.
Yeah, I would say when I made that short film, which is there's a flow to it, an emotional story, but it's not a complete story. I mean, it was more along the way after that I felt like I wanted to tell more complete stories. But that was more of an abstract story. But one of the main things I did was I took some of my main inspirations from artists and literally just pulled them into the film. Some of them are very obvious. Picasso, Paul Klee, Kandinsky, some of the artists of the so-called modern period, which is now ancient. But I was experimenting. I just wanted to see what does it feel like. And there was a very good artist who mainly did things for the magazine, The New Yorker. The New Yorker is a magazine that's always had beautiful artistic covers and really great cartoons. And I've had it my whole life. But this artist, his name was Saul Steinberg. He's incredible. He's, later, he wasn't from the modern art period. He was from much later. But he's just someone I love. So I also sort of was heavily influenced from him. So I use these different styles in that short film. I also used stop motion, and I used hand-drawn animation, a little bit of cutout animation. And I think it was just me trying things on. I was like, it's an experimental film. I want to experiment with taking these influences very directly into the film and bringing them to life. Along the years afterwards, I think that it was my style, my influences, they became more sublimated so that it's not so obvious maybe what the influences are. And they grew, and I kind of developed my own style. Or I choose to work, to work with different illustrators and sculptors and designers that I'm drawn to because it feels like a complement to a vision I might have for a film. For example, on Córlein, which was a film I made like 12 years ago. I happened across this Japanese artist Tadahiro Uesugi. But the funny thing is, his work, he's an illustrator, beautiful, gorgeous work, but his work is directly influenced by late 1950s, early 1960s American illustration. So that sort of fed into his style, and it's the basis of his work. But you know, there's no real connection to the modern art movement in that film. It was more about Tadahiro. It was more about high fashion. So, you know, from a time when I was taking my influences very, very directly, I kind of came to a place of just developing a sensibility of what feels right for this project. And I still draw, I still sketch, but mainly finding artists better than me who are the right fit for a particular story.
Do you think you'll ever be as experimental again?
I always try to have something experimental in my films, like James and the Giant Peach. You know, he has this nightmare when they get off course. Mm-hmm. He's sleeping. He has this nightmare, and I used cutout animation with sort of replacement photos for faces, and James is an insect, and the ants his relatives are after him to eradicate him. And for me, that was sort of the experimental part of that film. And the people at Disney, they didn't like it very much. but I don't care. I'm very proud of that experiment. In the newest film, Wendell and Wild, my experimental area is where the main character, her name is Kat, she sort of has to enter this, it's like entering the cave and face your fears. And she sort of has to face her demons and not be controlled by them anymore, but take charge of her own memories, the bad things that have happened to her that have become like this memory monster. She has to stand up to it, take it apart, and own her memories. And that's the experimental section of that film. So in a feature, I would say I'm always going to experiment, at least in one large sequence, and then with the look of it or character design. I think the only, if I was going to do a purely experimental project, it would have to be a short film, because, you know, people aren't going to pay for a feature length, purely experimental movie. You know, just that's not how it works.
Yeah, unfortunately. I wanted to ask you, because we have the privilege of having someone here who went through the motions of technology. I mean, Nightmare was shot on film, right? Mm-hmm. James and the Giant Peach was also shot on film?
Yes.
Yes. And from Coroline on, it's already digital. It's a digital photography, compositing and everything, right?
That's right.
So what is your experience of that transition, and how did things change the process of making a film? Because you spoke about stop motion being this ancient thing, this very material thing, and then when you add the digital element to it, I wonder how does it change the art, and what do we gain, what do we lose?
Yeah, I'll give you a few sort of examples of how the technology came in and how I try to use it and try to not let it sort of take control. But when we go back to Nightmare Before Christmas, we're shooting on film, and it's always this this nail biting time. You finish your shot, you send it to the lab, and you don't know, is it going to work? Is the lab going to screw up and mess up the film? Because once in a while that happens. These are all, very short pieces of film for the lab, so they're just cutting it all together. And then the big breakthrough was someone invented a digital frame grabber. And how many frames could it grab? It could grab 2. So, but what we had was, we did have these old 35 millimeter cameras that were very good for doing stop motion. The movement in the camera would register exactly, so it wasn't jumping around all the time. But we could put a video tap and have a mirror to get the actual image. And then through the video tap, we could take it into the frame grabber. And basically what it gave us was this sort of a safety system. You could be in the middle of a shot you've worked on for 2 days, and the ankle of a puppet breaks and the puppet falls over. Now, the only way to keep what you've done is you do a cutaway shot or an insert, but what you had planned for the shot is ruined. But now with the digital frame grabber, we remove the puppet and send it to the puppet hospital, and it comes back fixed. And then you line it up with the saved digital frame. We also then had the ability to, on the video monitor, you could sort of draw an arc, with a grease pencil. You could sort of plot out the movements a little more. And I feel like we did incredibly great animation with that little bit of help, but not too much help. But then the years go by, and we start shooting all digitally. Well, you're going to be storing the entire shot. Every frame you have is safely stored digitally. But what started to happen is the animators would just look at what they shot over and over. They lost their sort of forward momentum. Stop motion is an actual performance. It's not like just creating your keyframes or key poses and then having a computer or an assistant animator fill them in with the ability to shift things around all the time. It's an actual performance. You have to cross through over the canyon or, the jumping sharks on a tightrope, and you have to get to the other side. And what started happening is everybody kept looking backwards and studying what they'd done and wasting a lot of time. So I tried to encourage people to look forward and let me come around. I'll check on the work that you've done, and which was almost always going to be just fine, and moving forward. So that was one of the things that the downsides of capturing everything digital, that it impacted the performances and slowed everything down. Another thing, technology thing that we did on Coraline was, I knew this guy, Lenny Lipton. He died recently, but he was a longtime friend. And he's an amazing guy. Like when he was 19, he wrote the lyrics to this song, Puff the Magic Dragon, which became this giant hit. But he was also a scientist and a filmmaker. And for years and years, he was developing a sort of modern 3D cinema, where I don't mean 3D like CG, but he would call it stereoscopic. And I would always check in on him every few years and see how it was looking, and just, shoot the shit with him and catch up. And when the time came to do Coraline, I had checked in, and he showed me his latest version of stereoscopic cinema, and he had sold it to a company called Real D. So people would be able to buy digital projection and show movies that in 3D that had never looked that good. So I felt like I want to use this technology for Coraline. And we ultimately, I think we used it better than anyone ever had. In fact, there was a competition for best 3D film of the year, and we beat James Cameron's Avatar. I didn't think we'd win, so I didn't go to the ceremony. Someone took the award, and I've never gotten it. But the thing is, we put a lot of effort. I wrote like a script for how do we use the 3D well, not to show it off and like make people tired of it, but make it part of our story. You know, there's a girl, Coroline. She's very unhappy in her life. She discovers another version of her life. So make her real life feel very compressed and not very dimensional. And we actually built sets that were not deep. They were very shallow. She goes to this other world, and then we built everything deeper. And we made the 3D effect be more about the deep space rather than going into your eyeball. We also, we saved the poke in the eye for maybe 2 times, but then we also started to make, when the other world that seems so beautiful starts to be a dangerous place, we made the 3D part of it very intense. But the net effect of what I'm saying about that new technology was, suddenly all the theaters could show 3D. You had to wear these glasses. People didn't like that. And there was a ton of bad 3D movies. Everybody was doing their films 3D, and they were doing it badly. So what we thought was the future of all cinema kind of just became, it was more expensive. Oh, you want to see it 3D, you have to pay twice as much. My point is, for that moment in time, we did something amazing, but in the long run, I don't shoot 3D anymore. Was it a waste? Maybe. But it was fully embracing technology, doing it very well, and then that becoming kind of a tired thing, even though, there are still some 3D films. As far as drawing the line between what's appropriate and what's not. On Coroline, okay, we're shooting digitally. You can store the entire shot. We can composite without any generation loss, which is wonderful. We're shooting in 3D, but I wanted to make sure, well, why are we doing it stop motion? And I try to do as much practically. Very few CG effects. I was able to build gigantic sets, so there's hardly any compositing. I would do things like put wires on tree branches so that they're moving, and it's all done practically. I would have like cloud patterns projected on characters that are moving as they're walking along, all done practically. Rain outside windows was a practical effect. I just felt like, well, I like the marriage of handmade with the new technology. And I always ask that question of why are we doing stop motion? What is it about it we love? And 2 more things about that particular film. There's for people who know the film, there's a couple of instances where there's large groups of animals. Some are animating more, others are less, but there's this jumping mouse circus. We have these little mice that play instruments, and they're performing in a circus. They're jumping around, doing formations, and it would have been an obvious, oh, we'll do that in computer graphics. But I knew that it would be mediocre. It wouldn't be like great computer graphics, and it would what would it do for the film if it was computer graphics? Aside from just, oh, great, these things have come to life, but they don't look like the rest of the film. So I simplified things and made sure that most of the time the mice, when they're playing instruments and are hopping around, was cycles so that we could reuse the same full replacement bodies of the mice. And it looks great. And it's like, people love it. It's very stop motion-y. The other thing was there's a giant audience of Scotty dogs at this theater. Another instance where, yeah, we could have done all CG. but it was always going to look better if it was practical. So we made, 150 Scotty dogs, but there was only a few that had to move well, and the rest could just move, in a minor way. So I pushed really hard to do as much as we could practically, not digitally, because we're already using digital to capture the film and do the post and so forth. Now I've seen films, I did the first film at this company called Leica, which was, Travis Knight, Phil Knight, the guy who has the Nike shoe empire. His son turned out to be an extraordinarily good animator, and this company was formed to do animation. And Córliinn was the first feature film. But Travis has, in subsequent films, he has used CG to do crowd scenes and this, that, and the other thing. And the animation is so perfectly done. I sometimes wonder, why are you doing it in stop motion if no one feels that or knows it? I think you need to be reminded of what is it about it that you love. And
I think
so I know it's a very long answer to your question, but
yes.
it's complicated. It's complicated because even now on the last film or anything else, if I make any more films, it's like, what is it about it that first drew me to stop motion? And is the audience going to be okay when things aren't perfect, when there's bumps and mistakes, which to me are part of the charm of it? And I have to say, yes, maybe not a big audience or everyone in the world, but there are enough people who get it, who love it. And I know that there's lots of kids still learning to do stop motion, thousands and thousands of kids, because it's so tactile and direct. You set up your phone, there's probably a free program to capture the images, and then you take a toy or aluminum foil that you can shape, or clay or Legos. And so I feel like there's always going to be kids wanting to do it, wanting to see it, and enough people to keep it alive.
That's amazing. I completely agree with you. I think there's a general consensus here in the audience about the feeling of the films. I'm being signaled here that we're running out of time.
Yeah.
I think we'll take 2 audience questions. Does anybody?
Come on, three.
What made you decide to come back to making movies after like more than 10 years? Because there's Córliinn, which is 2009, and then Wendell and Wild, which is 22.
What made you decide to come back and making films after 10 years? Because there's such a long gap between Córliinn and Wendell and Wild. So what? Maybe the question is, where were you?
Yeah. No, there's no like big mysteries. After Córliinn, I actually did set up a new studio in San Francisco, where I mainly live, where I'm from, to do another film, and we got very far on it. It was called The Shadow King. I have like 5 minutes of finished footage, but it was done under Pixar and Disney. And at a certain point, John Lasseter, who was in charge, the deal was, if I could make this film for this much money, it was good amount, but much less than what they spent on their big CG films. But if I could make it for this much, they'd support it artistically. And so we're well underway, but John couldn't help himself. He kept asking for change after change after change. After I had total freedom on Córliinn, I got to do exactly what I wanted. It doesn't mean I didn't listen to people if they had good ideas. But with John Lasseter, he kept changing everything to the point where the budget was going to creep up and go beyond what we'd agreed, and they shut it down. It was one of the worst days and best days of my life, because I couldn't take being tortured like that forever and ever. So between that being shut down in, I think it was 2012, and then my mother became quite ill, and I spent a lot of time with her, and I kind of just sort of stepped away from filmmaking, and eventually, though, I had this old idea. The Wendell Wild idea was something I'd kicked around, and Jordan Peele had a show on television, Key and Peele, that really riveted me. And I came out of my shell, reached out to them, and eventually did something else. So I didn't just shut off immediately. I had another film, and that's a film that I might pick up again because I got the rights back from Disney to The Shadow King.
So yeah, what is the might? What's the update?
It's just a question of going out and trying to sell it. I haven't done anything with it for years, and it won't be the same film, but it'll be based on my original story. It'll be a better film than what was happening. It won't be a film by committee, but I have high hopes. I mean, it's a really good idea. I mean, I'll just tell you, the idea is this kid that's if everyone knows the story of Dumbo the elephant, it's a very sweet, beautiful film. A deformity, giant ears become the miracle because an elephant can fly. Well, I sort of took the idea, but it's not as cute. It's a kid with the longest fingers in the world. They're as long as noodles. And his brother makes him hide them because they're embarrassing and people make fun of him. But it's this kid who is ultimately, he's taught to make hand shadows. They're the most amazing hand shadows in the world. Something that when you're a kid and you see a good hand shadow, it's miraculous. But his are phenomenal, and he can bring them to life. And there's adversary and a monster shadow and all this other stuff. But it's a good story, and I've always loved shadows that move, that come to life. So I have hopes of bringing that one back. There's a saying that live action films are real life without the boring parts, and I say animated films are live action films without their boring parts. We can cut everything away and get it down to pure invention. And yes, I mean, if I make more films, it's because of that power of animation to completely invent a space, a world, characters, change the laws of physics. But yeah, I've dabbled in some live action, but animation is my first and my most powerful love because of its power to completely create from nothing.
I wanted to ask, in most of your films, there's this element very reminiscent to me of like old school musicals. And I wanted to ask, what is your inspiration? Like, what are stuff that you really connected, that inspired you to do those stuff, and about the connection of your passion to all sorts of arts, and especially you said music, with the animation, and in general, just the art pieces that really inspired you for your films?
Yeah, the music, it varies in the different films. I'll try to be brief. It's hard, but going back to Nightmare Before Christmas, Disney they'd always had some songs in their films, always. It just goes back to the very beginning. But in Nightmare Before Christmas, it was almost like an operetta. We had way more songs, like 10 songs in a reprise. And I was a little worried. It might be too many. It might be hard for the audience because they weren't used to having that many. And Tim's idea was Well, we'll see at the end. We'll cut them out if there's too many. But of course, by the time I finished directing the film and we'd animated all those songs, Tim brought up, well, yeah, maybe there's too many we could lose. I said, no, we're not losing any songs, because I'd fallen in love with them, and I felt like it may take time, but the audience will love all the songs as we do. That and it was true when the film first came out, and I'd be with different audiences, I could feel a certain percentage like pulling away, like, oh, it's too many of these. But over time, the film grew a bigger audience, and the main reason was because of those songs and keeping all those songs. On James the Giant Peach, it's much fewer songs, and they're maybe more traditional. Randy Newman, who did the score and wrote the songs. Again, it was a Disney tradition to have some songs, and I love music. I love some musicals, Stephen Sondheim musicals, and some others. But I'd say that I got very lucky for the music on Coraline. There was an idea to have more songs, and I was working with this pop group. They're still around, and they're very inventive, called They Might Be Giants. Mm-hmm. I don't know if people know about them, but
yeah, we know about them.
They were writing songs, and I found in the end, there is one very short song they did when the other father's playing the piano and singing about Coraline. That's John Linnell singing and something he wrote. But it was I couldn't really collaborate with him. I felt like, well, if I could just pick songs I'd already done, it might work. But it didn't fit. It didn't fit. And then I found the composer Bruno Coulet, who ended up doing the score. And he was, this French composer. He had done a few nature documentaries. One was called Microcosmos, about the world of insects and tiny things. Another one was about bird migration. But I felt, when you're looking for someone to score the film, to write the music, you listen to everybody. Well, who seems like they could fit? And it was either the music would be too childish or too friendly or too safe, like from a lot of animated films, or too dark, like if it was a horror film. But I found with Bruno Coulet, I got this feeling that he could bring out a sense of real childhood fear and magic and fun, like the truth of what kids sense about things, that they're fascinated. They might be fascinated by something dead. They have fears, but they also can be very brave and bold. So finding him and then having him do the score, and he added some songs, I feel is a miracle. And that film, Coraline, I think at least a third of its success. Would you maybe put him in a room? Is like so instrumental in making the film whatever I consider a success, and his contribution is that way. So this last film that I did, we ended up using a lot of needle drop songs, existing songs. Some of them are 30 years old, but because the character of Kat, and that was a new experience, using existing, pop songs, punk music, fitting those in with Bruno Coulet was very challenging. But I will say one good little funny story. I'm a musician, and when I was young, I thought, that's gonna be my life. But animation became my life, and I'm very happy. But I still play. I play piano and some guitars. I used to play clarinet. But it comes in really handy because I can. Well, back on Nightmare Before Christmas, I'm working with Danny Elfman, who'd already had some huge success working with Tim, and before that, he was a successful rock star. Let me say, Danny's going to have a gigantic ego, and there was a part of the film where it's called Making Christmas, where you go back and forth between the nightmare world where Jack Skellington and his group are preparing toys to be given to the kids, and a lot of them are horrific and scary and weird. And then the Santa world, where all the elves are making the traditional toys of the time. And I wanted the music to change between the two because Danny had the same pounding in both, and he just completely dismissed me. So what I did was I went and I wrote something myself, and it wasn't meant to be in the film, but I said, "Oh, hey, Danny, look what I tried here." And he just said, "Oh, I could certainly do better than that." And he, and that's so he did what I wanted, but I had to, trick him a little bit.
Amazing.
Directors do whatever they can to get what they need.
Amazing. That's an amazing note to finish this conversation. Thank you so much, Henry. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alonzo, and everyone who came to watch. And I hope the animation. I've never been to Israel. I'd love to come, and I'd love to visit the animators.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any animation film festivals?
You are very welcome here. Yeah, come to our festivals, come to Animation, come to Animix. You are very, very welcome here. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much. We need to clear the place because they're gonna just have a little film here called Coraline on the screen.
Yeah. Okay. I hope people like it, and thanks for listening.
Thank you
to me.
very much.
Wonderful to speak with you. Bye-bye.